My name is Sarah, and for almost 20 years, Thanksgiving didn't feel like a holiday. It felt like a job I never applied for. My parents expected me to cook a full feast for 30 people, while everyone else watched football, poured wine, and told me I had a gift. At first, I believed it. I thought being needed meant I was loved. But year after year, the exhaustion grew heavier, and joy turned into quiet resentment. Last Thanksgiving, instead of starting the turkey at 4 a.m., I zipped up a suitcase, bought a last-minute flight, and walked away from the kitchen that had become my prison. This is my story of boundaries, burnout, and freedom. Stay with me and subscribe for more true stories of family, betrayal, and breaking free. It all began when I was 16, and what seemed like a temporary accident quietly turned into a lifelong assignment. My mom had broken her wrist just days before Thanksgiving, and without hesitation, she announced from her recliner, "Sarah can handle it. She's been helping me for years." Helping meant peeling potatoes and setting the table, not coordinating a banquet for over 20 people. But I was too young to challenge her, and too eager to prove myself. I stayed up half the night, burning rolls, crying over timing mistakes, but somehow delivering a meal that was edible enough to earn praise. Everyone clapped my back, told me I had a gift, and my mom beamed with pride as if she'd trained me personally. What I didn't realize then was that the praise wasn't just gratitude, it was a contract. The next year, the pattern repeated. This time, there was no broken wrist, no emergency. My parents simply announced, "Sarah's got Thanksgiving. She's so good at it." What was once a desperate act of stepping up became an expectation cemented by family tradition. And each compliment, "No one makes stuffing like Sarah," or "You've got a real talent for gravy," was less about admiration and more about convenience. By elevating my cooking into something special, they quietly excused themselves from lifting a finger. As the years passed, the guest list grew. Cousins married, kids were born, friends got invited, and before long my head count climbed past 30. Every year, I found myself mapping oven schedules like a military strategist, juggling 3 grocery runs, and prepping side dishes days in advance just to pull it off. Office workers or analysts might have recognized the logistics involved. Spreadsheets could barely contain the complexity of cooking for that many people. But my family never treated it like labor. To them, it was Sarah's Thanksgiving, a brand that belonged to everyone but me. The problem wasn't just the work, it was the loneliness of it. While my dad sipped wine and cousins watched football, I was sweating in the kitchen. My siblings popped in to grab snacks and offered the classic line, "Let me know if you need anything." But when I asked for help chopping vegetables or stirring a pot, they'd vanish as quickly as they appeared. "We don't want to get in your way," they'd laugh. In reality, they didn't want to share the burden. My kitchen became a stage where I was the only performer, trapped behind the curtain while the audience relaxed. Worse, the compliments soured into critiques disguised as advice. "The turkey was a little dry last year. Could the stuffing be less salty this time?" Aunt Marie's rolls were apparently better, but mine would do. Instead of feeling appreciated, I felt evaluated, like unpaid staff whose worth was measured only in flavor and presentation. What once made me proud now felt like chains. By my 20s, the physical strain was undeniable. Cooking for 30 people requires the endurance of a line cook and the precision of an event planner. Friends would invite me to their Thanksgiving gatherings, potlucks where everyone contributed a dish, but I always declined. I'd shrug and say, "I can't. My family depends on me." They'd look puzzled. Couldn't someone else take a turn? Couldn't it be a potluck? The thought had never been entertained in my household. My role had been cemented too deeply. The truth is, the praise that had once fueled me became the very tool that bound me. Being told I was the best at Thanksgiving turned into manipulation. It excused everyone else from responsibility, locked me into a cycle of obligation, and erased my right to enjoy the holiday. Thanksgiving was no longer about gratitude or family connection, it was about performance, about upholding the brand of Sarah's Thanksgiving, even when it left me drained, isolated, and resentful. Looking back, it's easy to see how invisible labor gets repackaged as love, but at the time, I didn't have the language to call it exploitation. All I knew was that year after year, I stood in the kitchen alone, while the rest of my family celebrated. The years rolled on, and with each Thanksgiving, the numbers crept higher. What had once been 20 relatives around a long dining table became 30, then 32, as cousins married, had children, and brought friends who just had to experience Sarah's Thanksgiving. My holiday table turned into an expanding guest list that felt less like family tradition and more like unpaid catering. Every November, I became a one-woman logistics department. Office managers and analysts would recognize the nightmare of trying to coordinate 30 individual meals with one oven and 4 burners. I had spreadsheets of oven times, prep lists taped to the refrigerator, and color-coded sticky notes on the counters. Still, no matter how organized I became, the sheer scale left me drained, and my family treated it as though it were my destiny. They praised my efficiency but never offered meaningful help. Instead, they piled on new requests, each one framed as harmless but adding hours to my workload. One year, it was a cousin's new boyfriend with a list of allergies longer than the shopping receipt. Another year, my sister-in-law announced she was gluten-free and expected me to recreate every dish to accommodate her diet. "You're so talented, Sarah. You'll figure it out," she chirped, while I was the one calculating how to double recipes and manage separate oven rotations. The most cutting part wasn't the work, it was the way the requests exposed how little anyone respected the sacrifice behind it. They treated me like staff. My dad would stroll into the kitchen, glance at the roasting turkey, and casually mention that last year it was a little dry. An aunt once sighed that Aunt Marie's rolls were better, though mine would do. What they didn't realize was that those words chipped away at me more than the hours on my feet. It was never about nourishment. It was about perfection. About upholding a family brand they had decided belonged to me. By my late 20s, I was collapsing into bed Thanksgiving night with aching feet and a hollow chest. Friends invited me to their own celebrations, potlucks where everyone contributed, and I envied the simplicity. When I explained why I couldn't join, they'd stare at me, bewildered. "Why don't they all just pitch in?" they asked. The idea seemed obvious to everyone else, but impossible in my family. In their eyes, tradition was sacred, and the tradition was me. 18 years of this cycle hardened into something like resentment. My holiday memories weren't of laughter around the table, or playing games with the kids they were, of crying in the pantry while the turkey rested, eating my meal standing at the counter, or scraping plates alone while everyone else lounged in the living room. Each Thanksgiving became another reminder that my value to the family wasn't as a daughter or a sister, but as a labor force. The breaking point came quietly. Last year, my dad handed me a sheet of paper 3 days before Thanksgiving. "Oh, by the way, the guest list's up to 32. A couple of your cousins are bringing friends. I told them you wouldn't mind." I remember staring at the list, the names blurring into one another as my mind did the math. More groceries, more prep time, more pressure. 32 people. 3 days to replan everything. My dad's tone was casual, as if he were assigning me to pick up milk on the way home, not orchestrate a banquet. That night, standing in my kitchen surrounded by shopping lists and cookbooks, I whispered to myself, "I can't do this anymore." The words felt foreign, almost dangerous, as though admitting them out loud might unravel the fragile balance I'd maintained for years. But they were true. I couldn't. Not physically, not emotionally, not ethically. What my family saw as devotion had become exploitation. I realized then that Thanksgiving was no longer about gratitude. At least, not for me. It was about control. About them expecting me to sacrifice because I always had. And I was done. For years, I told myself that what I was doing was love. Love looked like 30 dishes, 12 hours on my feet, and a kitchen that felt more like a battlefield than a home. Love looked like swallowing exhaustion and smiling when people critiqued the turkey. Love looked like being indispensable. But therapy forced me to ask a harder question. Was it really love? Or was it exploitation dressed up as tradition? The sessions were uncomfortable at first. I sat on a worn leather couch, hands twisting, telling my therapist about the lists, the pressure, the guilt. She didn't nod along politely the way my friends did. She interrupted. "Sarah, what would actually happen if you stopped?" I gave the automatic answer. The family would be furious, the holiday would collapse, I'd be branded selfish. She tilted her head. And then what? That pause, that question, was like a stone dropped into water, rippling through everything I thought I knew. I realized I'd been living by a rule no one had written but everyone enforced. Sarah sacrifices, and everyone else enjoys. My therapist called it a boundary problem. I called it my life. But slowly, through those conversations, I began to recognize that helping family had turned into a system of unpaid labor, one that left me depleted and invisible. The breakthrough didn't come with fireworks. It came in a grocery aisle. I was pushing a cart stacked high with bags of flour, cranberries, and enough butter to feed an army. The list in my hand felt heavier than the cart itself. 32 people, 3 days to pull it off. My chest tightened. I could picture the sleepless nights ahead, the aching back, the inevitable complaints disguised as suggestions. For the first time, instead of thinking, "How will I manage this?" my brain whispered, "Why am I managing this at all?" I stopped in the middle of the aisle, the hum of refrigerators around me, the chatter of shoppers passing by, and then I just let go. I left the cart, every single carefully chosen item, right there between the canned yams and the green beans. I walked out of the store with nothing in my hands but my car keys and a sense of clarity I'd never felt before. That evening, I called my best friend. My voice was shaking, half from fear, half from adrenaline. "Are you doing anything for Thanksgiving?" She hesitated. "Flying to Portland to see my sister. Why? Do you have room for one more?" There was a silence, then laughter. "Sarah, are you serious? You're always chained to that kitchen." "Not this year," I said. And just like that, I gave myself permission to leave. For someone in corporate America, it might feel like renegotiating a contract that had been one-sided for too long. For small business owners and freelancers, it was like finally charging what my labor was worth instead of giving it away for free. For teachers, nurses, or public service workers, it was the familiar weight of caretaking, but this time, I was choosing not to carry it alone. For blue-collar workers, it was the unfairness of one person carrying the load, while everyone else clocked out early. My decision wasn't about abandoning family. It was about reclaiming my humanity. Therapy had given me the language I needed. Boundaries. Boundaries weren't walls. They were doors. Doors I could open or close depending on whether the situation respected my dignity. My family had confused gratitude with entitlement. They assumed my yes was endless, but a yes without choice isn't love. It's servitude. When I booked the ticket to Portland, it felt like buying my freedom. The cost was steep. Last-minute airfare always is, but I thought of it as an investment. The kind of financial decision people in finance or law would analyze in terms of return. The return wasn't dollars, it was self-respect. It was the possibility of joy. Of course, the guilt came rushing in as soon as I hit confirm. My entire life had been training me to equate saying no with betrayal. What would my parents say? What chaos would 32 people face without me? But then another voice pushed through. They'll adapt. They're grown adults. They can figure it out. And in that moment, I understood something powerful. Tradition only has power if you consent to it. I had been consenting for 18 years, but I didn't have to anymore. That was the real turning point, not leaving the cart, not booking the flight, but realizing I was allowed to choose myself. The night before Thanksgiving, the phone rang like it always did. My dad's voice was calm, almost routine. Cooking starts at 4 a.m., right? Don't forget to thaw the turkey. For years, I had answered with nervous laughter or weary compliance, but this time, my reply was steady. Dad, I'm not cooking this year. The silence that followed was deafening. Then came disbelief, anger, bargaining, every stage of panic wrapped into one phone call. But I didn't budge. I had already bought my ticket, already packed my suitcase, already chosen myself. Thanksgiving morning, while my family gathered expecting a usual miracle meal, I was sitting at the airport with coffee in hand. Instead of calculating oven times, I was boarding a plane. Instead of a hot, frantic kitchen, I had a window seat and the promise of peace. Back home, chaos erupted. With no neatly arranged feast waiting, panic spread through the house. Relatives rummaged through the pantry, pulling out canned vegetables and boxed stuffing. Someone ran to the store only to find most of the turkeys gone, settling instead for a frozen bird that wouldn't thaw in time. Dessert ended up being a burnt pie and a package of grocery store cookies. What had once been Sarah's perfect Thanksgiving turned into a patchwork of pre-made sides and half-baked dishes. The reactions were predictable. Some relatives were furious, accusing me of ruining the holiday. They sent texts filled with guilt trips. How could you abandon family? Don't you care about tradition? Others were simply stunned, unable to fathom how the machine they had relied on for 18 years had stopped overnight. But among the anger were glimmers of realization. A cousin admitted, I never realized how much work you put into this. An aunt wrote, we should have helped more. I'm sorry. Even my brother, usually silent, sent me a quiet message. I'm proud of you for finally saying no. Meanwhile, my Thanksgiving was radically different. In Portland, I found myself at a small gathering of 8 people. Everyone brought something: wine, side dishes, desserts. We played board games, shared stories, laughed until our stomachs hurt. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, I ate a meal while it was still warm. I felt like part of a holiday instead of a worker behind the scenes. The aftermath back home was messy. For weeks, I fielded calls and texts that alternated between guilt and anger. My parents were embarrassed, convinced I had humiliated them in front of relatives. But slowly, the truth settled in. They had built a tradition on my exhaustion, and I had finally dismantled it. By the next year, everything had shifted. My family couldn't rely on me anymore, so they were forced to adapt. We moved to a potluck model where everyone contributed something. Some brought appetizers, others desserts, and the host handled the turkey. It wasn't perfect, dishes overlapped. Timing was chaotic, flavors clashed, but for the first time, the responsibility was shared. And for the first time, I sat at the table like everyone else. I ate food while it was hot, joined conversations instead of missing them, and actually felt present in my own family holiday. My kitchen was no longer a prison. Thanksgiving was no longer a burden. Looking back, that moment of saying no was the climax of my story. It wasn't about rebellion for rebellion's sake. It was about reclaiming dignity, proving that tradition should never come at the expense of one person's well-being. My refusal forced my family to face what they had taken for granted and to build something healthier in its place. Now, every Thanksgiving feels lighter. Some relatives stopped coming altogether, unable to accept a holiday that didn't come wrapped in perfection. But those who remained stayed because they valued connection over convenience. And that, to me, was the real resolution. Because sometimes chaos is exactly what a family needs to see the truth. And sometimes, the bravest thing you can do isn't cooking for 30 people, it's refusing to cook at all. It took me 18 years to realize that love isn't measured by how much of yourself you sacrifice. Real love respects boundaries. By finally saying no, I didn't destroy my family. I gave it a chance to become healthier, fairer, and more honest. Now my Thanksgivings are smaller, warmer, and filled with connection instead of exhaustion. I get to sit at the table, share laughter, and actually taste the meal while it's hot. I'm no longer the unpaid caterer. I'm a daughter, a find, sister, a person who matters. And that shift is worth more than any perfect tradition. So I'll leave you with this. If your family takes your sacrifice for granted, will you keep serving in silence, or will you stand up for yourself? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to subscribe for more true stories of family, betrayal, and hard-won freedom.